Okay, everyone, welcome to Stirring the Pot podcast. We have a very special guest with us today, Dr. Thaddeus Johnson, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology here at Georgia State University. Um, Dr. Johnson is a former Memphis police law enforcement official. He teaches here at Georgia State now. His research focuses on police policy and innovations, urban violence, crime control, and racial disparity. He is the author and co author of numerous articles and reports and a book entitled Deviance Among Physicians: Fraud, Violence, and the Power to Prescribe. So, welcome, Dr. Johnson.
Hi, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here. I appreciate it.
All right. So I guess we could just jump right into it. As you know, the Department of Justice has launched an investigation against Fulton County Jail, aka Rice Street, and the conditions at the jail. So, given the recent civil investigations by the DOJ into the conditions at this jail, what is your initial thoughts on the gravity of the allegations, particularly regarding living conditions, violence, and excessive force?
Man, I know that's a wonderful question, and thank you for just covering this topic. And let me just kind of set the stage is that, I really appreciate you covering this topic because usually, our brothers and our sisters and our community members who are behind bars, oftentimes we forget about them. Oftentimes, with policing, with the courts, it's really easy. It's not easy. It's a little bit easier to hold them accountable and kind of know what's going on because they're more public facing, right? They do their work a lot of times, often in the public. When you're talking about correctional facilities, and particularly your local facilities, right? Your counties and your city jails and things of that nature, like we're talking about right here, who often don't have the resources, who often go under resourced, right? Who many times are overcrowded. And we can talk about what are some of those reasons, because some of those reasons are also system related or perhaps law related. When we talk about programs like diversionary programs and things like that, we have to also think about the full picture, right? And so I know we'll get into that, but just all that to be said is that it's heartbreaking, right? Because and I'm saying this is oftentimes when you talk about reform, the people who are incarcerated, and particularly those who are in our local facilities, not our state facilities, federal, our local facilities are left out of the reform conversation. And so it's heartbreaking to see that people are actually dealing with these conditions. It's inhumane. To me, it's a human rights violation. These allegations, it's more than beyond misconduct and things of that nature, right? It's more than beyond a civil rights violation. To me, these are human rights violations. You talk about the living conditions. You even talking about. I was reading some other articles that were talking about. The place is so deteriorating so bad that you can use pieces of metal from the wall or falling apart debris from the facility as shanks and as weapons, right? No, you can't have people living like that. And then you even talking about, even things like excessive force. On top of that, those allegations, or not only excessive force, but also, uh, not treating people humanely. There was one person who was found deceased in the facility, and this person had insects crawling all over him. We can't have that, and so it's heartbreaking, it's infuriating, and again, it's beyond to me a civil rights violation. This is really a human rights issue to me.
Yeah, I agree. The infrastructure is, from the reports, it's just in really bad condition, and it is a health code violation. I wonder who's in charge of monitoring these things and keeping up with it, because it's not happening.
Yeah, and this is great. This is I really want to hit home about this because even in police and the other parts of things, when we're talking about who do we hold accountable, we tend to only hold accountable those frontline people, right? But
Hmm.
oftentimes those frontline people are just as big as much as victims to leadership, poor leadership, under resourcing, as much as the people that they're supposed to be serving, right? And so you have these issues when we're thinking about what type of facilities do we have? Why are these things under resourced, right? And you have people serving longer periods behind bars in these facilities before they even get a chance to get to trial. That what I start thinking about things like bail reform and thinking about these diversionary programming, like what can we do to alleviate this? And so, like part of it is state lawmakers. They have a role in this, right? Because they really help make fund the decision when it comes to this, and they are not to be held out of the accountability equation, right? You start talking about your county leadership. They have to be held accountable. These things are happening under their watch. The officers who are working in these facilities, yes, they should be treating these people humanely. Yes, they should be treating our community members who are incarcerated civilly and justly, right? They shouldn't be using excessive force against them. But the officers that don't control what the facilities look like, the officers are also working there. So it's not only showing a a, 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 a lack of concern for the people you're serving, but even your employees. You have your employees working in these very same conditions, right? You have your employees working in conditions that are more prone to violence and things of that nature. And so perhaps that violence and that excessive force goes hand in hand. We know that it's cyclical, right? And that those things are related. And so absolutely, you have also the leadership who's responsible for the behavior of the officers. Though I'm talking about the correctional staff. So you have different levels of that. When you're talking about the facilities, though, that's beyond the officers who are also working there. That goes to even I would even say the city mayor and the city government. They have a responsibility, even though it's a county facility. These things are occurring, whether it's investigating, whether it's asking questions. I'm not sure if those things happen or not, but there's no reason for a city like Atlanta. I can see if we were somewhere else in some other places, right? But there's no reason for economic capital like Atlanta to have these things going on. You see all these buildings, luxury complexes. You see local governments buying up properties and building more facilities, but we have people like this. There's no excuse for it. So absolutely, I think this accountability goes all the way up to the state level, and there's different levels and layers of accountability at each of those levels.
Right. So, in the light of the allegations of inadequate medical care and discrimination against individuals that have mental health issues, how do you see the issues contributing to the broader challenges within the criminal justice system, especially in terms of rehabilitation and inmate well being?
No, absolutely. And I think, first of all, it really starts with us seeing that people who are community members, again, who are incarcerated, and seeing them as human beings, and seeing them as actual part of our community, and seeing them as being worthy of redemption, right? And so, I mean, it all starts, fortunately or unfortunately, it all starts right there. And so, and we know that our justice system is under resourced, right? But after coming from the justice system, like, being a police officer, right? I'm on the street without the proper training, making decisions on do I have to take this person to the local jail or do I try to get them into some type of mental health care in the one local hospital that only has a ward that does that, right? Has a staff that does that. And so part of it comes with training the staff. But again, the staff, they are not responsible for even having the proper facilities for healthcare and these things, right?
Hmm.
And so it's just that's just totally inhumane, and that's the issue that we see throughout the justice system. And let me just say that this is not just an issue that we. And so if you are from Atlanta, and I say, well, it's not just an Atlanta problem, then maybe you'll say that's fortunate, right? Maybe you don't feel like we're just evil there. But if I tell you that we've seen this in places like in LA and other places across the US, and then I'll tell you that it's unfortunate because it means that we are under resourcing our justice system. We are under resources mental health care, not only for our community members, both in and outside the prisons and jails, but also for the people who are supposed to be serving very individuals, right? We under resource rehabilitation, right? And the one thing that you start talking about reform in incarcerated persons' well-being is not on the top of the list, and I haven't really seen it on many of those lists. And particularly, when you start talking about, and I think what people need to understand is that how under-resourced our local facilities are. They're so under-resourced. The staff is underpaid. You don't have the proper resources for the people we're supposed to be serving. We're struggling with staffing. They're struggling with staffing issues, meaning that people are serving not only in these facilities but also in our courts. And so we also have people sitting behind bars in these very facilities for longer than they should be because you have a backlog of things going on in the courts as well. And so, really all of these things are connected, and everybody in the justice system are fighting for resources. And you have things like policing. Policing is a revenue generating branch of the justice system. The courts is a revenue generating branch of the justice system, right? But the correctional side is not really revenue generating. And so oftentimes when you're looking across that spectrum, that's the side where you really see that these gaps and these lacks of services are really the most severe and the most egregious. So I hope I answered your question with that.
You did. So, the investigation also mentions structural risk and discrimination against individuals with psychiatric disabilities. How might these factors exacerbate existing problems within the correctional system? And what changes or reforms would you propose to address these issues? We talked a little bit about the structure and how the walls are basically breaking down and breaking apart.
Look, it's going to take fiscal investments, right, to get these things up to code. I did think that I see that there's been on the table that it's been proposed that perhaps we should, in order to make some improvements to the facilities, that we have to figure out what we need to do with the persons that are incarcerated. Some have said they're going to send them to Mississippi. Some said, send them somewhere in southern Georgia, 5 hours from here. And um, there's some debate about whether that's right or whether that's wrong. And both sides, they really have strong arguments. And it's one of those things where neither side is either right. And so I think it's not only just what should be done. It's like, even what's the process. And so of course we need to make investments so they can fix these facilities, right? Beyond fixing these facilities, we have to make sure that not just where they sleep at, not just where they eat at, but do we have healthcare facilities and a pharmacy? Do we have proper doctor's offices and the nurses stations inside of these facilities? And not only we talk about healthcare, like you said, psychiatric, right, and psychological health. I mean, we know that, again, it's not just in the justice system that we have these biases against those with mental health issues, those with substance abuse issues. It's in our broader society, and our systems are merely a microcosm of that. And so part of even addressing that means, training, hiring the right people, hiring, more qualified people, resourcing those people with proper training, the proper tools. Many times we expect our staff members to go in there and figure these things out. Well, they have to be trained. They have to be socialized. And so again, I'm not removing the spotlight of accountability from the people working there. But if you want to talk about sustainable change, we have to even look at the leadership. And again, it goes to the state, because are we going to allocate real dollars for this branch of the government that does not generate any revenue? And so it's part of the deeper biases that we have in society. So we have to train our staff. We have to make sure the facilities are up to date, and we have to make sure that we have the proper leaders in place. The proper leaders in place that in these facilities that exemplify the type of values and culture that we want in these places. We have to provide. And look, unfortunately, the justice system, and I'll shut up. The justice system is not a rehabilitative system, right? It's a punishing and blaming institution. And then we under-resource them because we ask them to do everything else right. And if we want to have proper interventions, both in and outside, we depend so much on nonprofits for reentry. It
Mm-hmm.
depends on so much on nonprofits, so all these things that we need to make sure that we shore that up and make these investments in some of those areas that I talked about. And yeah, they're not sexy. Yeah, they're not this, but I think maybe it's a mistake to pull people from these facilities, right, and move them to Mississippi or move them to Southern Georgia, because part of the thing is like now you're totally removing them from any social ties or bonds that they may have locally or what have you. And so, but there has to be some other ways though, because you have to think about the practical aspects of, well, if you're going to update these facilities, where are you going to house these individuals? And so you ask, what things can we do? Well, perhaps we can start looking at these diversionary programs. The people who I am not convinced that everybody who's sitting in local jails should be sitting in local jails. You have to think about what's the bail, what's keeping these persons behind bars all of this time in these local facilities. Is it the fact that people can't make bail? If bail is an issue, we need to start really evaluating that. And then remember, you have to always balance it against the public safety concerns. But places have done this and shown that you can do this safely, shown that you can do this properly, right? We oftentimes talk about the risk assessments, right, and really trying to figure out how do we try to best those who need to be held accountable and stay incarcerated, keep those there, but filter out all the others because it's not everyone. And so it's really coming to the table, looking at the data, working with academic facilities, trying to figure out how can we have the least bias risk needs assessment so we can really figure out who should and who shouldn't be in here. How can we adjust the bail settings? And so part of it is just narrowing the passageway to jail in the first place, right? And that's a big thing that we need to look at. Are there diversionary programs where prosecutors, who's eligible for drug diversion, who's eligible for mental health care diversion, and then also, think about, and I promise I'll shut up. Think about, things like what do you call it? PAD, the pretrial diversion, that when you have people who are unsheltered, oftentimes, and like Walgreens or these other places, that's not really a policing issue, but it requires social services, right? And so instead of even having these persons enter into the justice system that way in the first place, we can divert them not only when they get to court, but even before they hit the door of the jailhouse. And so those are just a couple of areas. It's not necessarily specific prescriptions, but it's more of like these are principled areas that we need to address that we can kind of cut their flow down a little bit as we start to make the investments in the staff and the facilities to serve these people like they need to be served.
Okay. And as you were saying about the people who are in position, um, from the mayor, state reps, I feel like us as a people, we really don't know the power in voting, and a lot of
Yes.
times decisions are being made for us because we're not
Mm-hmm.
there, because we're not aware. So I just wanted to
It,
add that in there.
No, no, no. And if I can kind of build on it, like
Please.
I think that I'm really tough on academia, right? The universities, right? And I'm always pushing the university, right? And they're responding. So let me not say like they're responding, but think about it. You talk about all the misinformation that's out there. Well, things like the criminology journals or the best public policy journals or the best crime journals, those are only usually available to people who are associated with universities, and usually universities have a little bit more money. I'm sure your HBCUs may not have access to those things, and I know because I've had requests from, hey, do you have this study here for some of my colleagues, right? And so I think a big thing is opening up the information passageways to the public so they can have access to most evidence-based practices. To understand, like when I'm looking at politicians and lawmakers, when the DA is running and I'm voting for the DA, what are the policies that I want to align with? Do I understand these policies, right? And so, part of that's where academia really comes in. Academics is our responsibility to make sure that we're public facing, that we're getting all the information out and about, and you're right, the power of the vote is not sexy. But even when we do research, and I start looking at how, there's different effect size in my statistical models, and I look at the area's political leanings. I'm telling you, the area's political leanings are often have a bigger effect in my statistical models than even a lot of the reforms that we've implemented. So there's a lot of power in the people, but part of it is how do we get good scientific evidence-based information in their hands so they can weigh it in their judgments of who they want to vote for. You know, even think about judges, right? Do we really know who the judge is, or do we just go and see, okay, he's a Democrat, he's a Republican, okay, I'm just going to vote along party lines, or this is the incumbent. I have no idea the disparity in their sentencing rates or all
Mm-hmm.
these things, right? But I'm going to vote for them because I recognize the name, or I'm just going to skip that anyway. And so, yes, you know, the people, we do have responsibility, right? And so it's definitely a two-way street. But I think academia can be a great mediator and provider for that good information so they can weigh their judgment better. So absolutely. So I'm sorry I went off on a tangent, but that's I think that's so important that we make sure that people who are privileged enough to be in these environments that we make sure that we are distillers of the best information and the truths that at least from our end.
Also, are we holding them accountable? Do we know what they support? Are we doing our background?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I
Mm-hmm.
ask a person, do you know who your state representative is? Do you go to their functions? You know, they like to give things away. And um, do you go? Do you know what it is that they are passionate about? Put your name out there, put your face out there so that you have a leg to stand on.
You know, absolutely, absolutely, and that's a big part of why we do the work that we do. You know, we travel a lot and we work with local officials. As part of it too, remember, oftentimes our local officials, and the higher up you go in those levels, from local to state to federal, you get a little bit more disconnected from your constituents. So you also not only need people who can bridge that gap when information is, why the information is so important to really compliment with what you're saying. It's the fact that we have to also make sure that there's someone and just communicate, what it is that the people want to those who we're electing. And so, and think about these places where you have sheriffs and things, right? Who you vote for has a profound impact on how these people police and enforce the law, how they treat the community. So yeah, absolutely. Like, I always tell people, you know, police are able to police because we allow them to police. The justice system is able to incarcerate people because we allow them to do so. So the power is in our consent to be policed, our consent to be judged and to be fined. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like that's why we talk about legitimacy, government legitimacy, police legitimacy. It sounds so like an abstract idea, but it's so important because the power is in the people's hands, and I think oftentimes either we forget that or either we wield it irresponsibly.
Yeah, I feel like voting empowers communities so that
Mm-hmm.
they have a say in the direction of their society. It's just so important to participate in that process. And one of the things that motivates me to vote is that my ancestors couldn't even vote, weren't even
Absolutely.
considered a whole human being. So now that I have this at my disposal, it would just be an injustice to them to not use it, to kind of shape um, the government policies and legislation.
And even things like the one thing that we all hate, right, is jury duty, right? But
Hmm.
what if there's underrepresentation not only in those areas? So you're absolutely right. And what happens is, people feel, the more illegitimate people feel the government is, oftentimes they become disenfranchised, right? They become, oftentimes they become disconnected. Oftentimes they feel that my vote doesn't matter. And oftentimes when that happens, it's cyclical, right? People see these injustices. The levels of procedural justice are very, very low, and then it impacts the civic participation. But again, there's power in the civic participation, and so it's absolutely. I know this wasn't the purpose, but it's like, it's like, I'm glad you asked. What can the people do? And I tell people, you can wield yourself, arm yourself with proper information, and not just from your side. Oh, if I'm Democratic, I'm just thinking that what the Democratic candidate is saying. No, they have to earn your vote. Look at what the other people are saying as well. Look what people who are the newcomers are saying as well. And so, we can hold our local officials, our civic leaders accountable. definitely, and federally, all the way up to the federal, through our vote, even though sometimes it may not feel that way.
Right. I agree. Okay. So, incidents like these, they often lead to public scrutiny and impact the trust in the criminal justice system. How do you think that policymakers and law enforcement agencies could effectively communicate with the public to maintain transparency and address concerns about accountability? Because a lot of the times we feel like we cannot trust these agencies and that there's a lot of deception and corruptness going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing, just like with the fear of crime often outpaces the actual crime rates. We know that our perceptions of corruption and things can often outpace the prevalence, because oftentimes you have a small body of actors, just like you do when you talk about those people who commit really serious crimes.
Mm-hmm.
You have a small body of actors who really drive that, right? And so first thing is rooting out those people who are indulging in unsavory practices, and that means being proactive. Like there shouldn't have had to be. So imagine, what if they had started proactively addressing those conditions behind down on Rice Street? What if they had came to the public and said, "Listen, we screwed up, and this is what we're lacking, and this is what needs to happen, and we want to hear your voice when it comes part of this." And you provide opportunities. You want to provide opportunities to hear the public, not announce 24 hours in advance that, hey, we're going to have a meeting down here. No, you need to provide multiple times, and you need to come out to the public. The public shouldn't have to come to you, right? And so, and I think, even when this is, I even think how the local leaders handle the communication of, even you start talking about Cop City and those things, right? I think, just communicating, being more public forward, involving the public, and really taking the public's insights to heart. I think, that dialogue would open up. And so, but the problem is everything's reactive. And
Mm-hmm.
now it feels like, well, the only reason you're doing anything is because somebody shed light on it. And so, first of all, we have to be more proactive, right? We have to be transparent. We need to put data up there, right? If I were a local leader, I would say this is the plan. I would have on every website, every social media, I would be all in the news and saying, here's a spreadsheet, and here are the columns in which we're going to check it off. Here is the timelines in which we plan to do it, and this is how much it's going to cost for us to do it. Because mind you, whose money are they spending?
Ours.
Right? They're spending hours, and so this is our purse stream, right? And those things, and so so we absolutely have to have a voice, and they know what the public feels about them. Local leaders, from police to everybody knows. When I was an officer, I knew it. It is well understood. And so when you want to make change, you need to really explain, because and we have to give the public a lot more credit. A lot smarter than oftentimes our leaders give us credit for.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more sensible, right? And yeah, look, governing is not easy, right? It's not easy at all. And sometimes you got to make a lot of hard decisions. Sometimes you got a lot of things pulling at you. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes decisions have to be made a little bit faster than others. But you have to make sure that everything you do is forward facing. You have to make sure that you, of sorts, atone for your sins publicly, and then you all move forward. And I always say it's like a marriage, right? You have a spouse who has not been faithful, but then you decide, you know what, we're going to go to counseling, we're going to work this out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to move forward. And you cross a line in the sand. And so I almost see it as that. And that final point is, once the spouse or our elected leaders show that they have a plan and want to move forward, they're trying to do better, we have to decide as a community that, okay, we're willing to work with you. And that's asking a lot of people who've been discriminated against, who don't trust. But I think, it's going through those steps like it is a relationship. Right, and not politicizing things, and so there's ways to do it. We've seen cities do it to help reduce crime. We've seen city do it, and we've seen involving the public has really reformed not just policing, but reforms whole systems. Even when you start talking about the crime fighting techniques like focused deterrence, or the other ones that really have sustainable crime reducing effects, those are the ones that involve the public, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
just the police coming in hotspotting this. No, it's the police working with the public leaders, the preachers, the grandmas, right? And all the dope boys, all these people, and working with these folks and figuring this stuff out. And so, but it requires building that trust. And so, all you can do is be transparent. Here's the plan. What do you think? And at some point, yes, as government leaders, you have to move forward. But even if it's just a small amount of intel, you can at least provide explanations and not just act like you're dictating over or ruling over us and make us at least feel like it's a democracy. And it's really simple as that at the end of the day. It's building a relationship, it's being transparent, and that doesn't cost a whole lot of money to do that.
No, it doesn't. Um, I feel like it if you're transparent, that it promotes a healthier democracy. It
Mm-hmm.
just builds public confidence in the jails, um, and we're able to hold people accountable. We want to make sure that inmates and people who are incarcerated are being treated fairly. Um,
And not forgotten about, right?
yeah, like
Not
preventing
forgotten
an
about.
abuse of power, because it's almost like it's an abuse of power.
And let me tell you, and let me tell you something. And let me just say this. Let me just talk about our criminal justice system more broadly.
Okay.
Our justice system, as far as racial disparities and state imprisonment, right, has gotten a lot more comparable treatment between black and white people. And we still have a long way to go. But let's talk about, we have made some encouraging movements, right? But the one thing that we're seeing is that 2/3 of the people who are incarcerated in our U.S. prisons are there for violent offenders, or either they're repeat offenders, right, or there's some type of gang or firearm affiliations going on. So what that means is that oftentimes that many of the people who are in our local facilities are those same, are our most hardened offenders who will end up being transferred to and convicted or sent to state prison. But if you have lower level offenders, people there for suspended licenses who can't make bail, or whatever it is, right? I'm just kind of going on whatever those things may be, and you have them around people who, yes, they need to be held accountable, but still a people. But there are two different levels of offending going on. That's not a really good thing, and you having these environment together, these people in these environments much longer when they could really have be back in their communities, right? They could be back working, trying to be productive, trying to get training, doing some things instead of being behind bars locally in an environment that includes a lot more violent offenders and gang members than we probably have at any other point in our correctional facilities over the past 20 years. And so that's another thing as well too. As we're trying to filter out lower level offenders, we have to make sure that we're not housing everyone together as it tends to be in local facilities as compared to where there's a lot of classifications and there's resources and there's some room for space in your state facilities. So yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about preventative measures and reform. From a policy perspective, what preventative measures or reforms can be implemented to avoid the reoccurrence of these type of incidents, not only at Rice Street, but on a broader scale?
No, absolutely. So this has also been an issue, and you're talking about reform. So we talk about diversionary programs all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but I think anything that we have to get it on the street, right? Because this is the thing. They did California realignment about a decade ago. And what they did was, if you wasn't a violent offender or a repeat offender, you were not going to be incarcerated in state prisons. But guess where you were being housed at? Or of those with property crimes and low level offending, in local facilities. Local facilities were never built for long term housing, right? It was never built for that. That's not the purpose. And so, yes, beyond even fixing those facilities up, making sure there are people squared away and passing it up in the budget, you're talking about what type of reforms can we do? So, do we have drug courts and drug diversion programs? Do we have adjustable or more liberal, what do you call it? bail bail amounts, right?
Mhm.
Do we what are we arresting people for, even on the street before they even make contacts for, right? Are we still arresting people for having a bag of weed in their pocket? Are we still taking people to jail for suspended licenses or things about child support or other things that are more financial as opposed to, as police officers, are we still stopping people who only have one broken tail light and writing tickets and doing investigations to try to look for crimes and things. So it's also beyond just what's going on, uh, reforms in the courts or reforms even for the jails, but also what's the reforms for police. How do we want our people to be police? How are we using our police resources, right? Because one thing we know is that as long as there are systemic inequities in the broader society, that means that police are going to resources are going to be unequally dispatched in black communities. And if it's going to be unequally dispatched in black communities, that means that the people who are coming through those front doors in any way are going to be disproportionately black, brown, and poor people. And so those preventative measures also mean, making investments in those communities. Right, and so it's not just we need reforms for this. We need reforms beyond the justice system to make
Mhm.
sure that there's affordable housing, to make sure that there's not food deserts, right? To make sure that the air that we breathe in our black communities is not dirtier and more polluted than other areas. To make sure that the air in Bankhead is not dirtier than the air in Buckhead.
Right.
Those types of things, right? And
Mhm.
so I know it sounds like a very politically correct answer, but there's levels to it. So we need those community investments. HUD has these tax credits. And when you have these affordable housing, also is a concentration of social services, also is a concentration of employment, also is a concentration of access to good nutritious food, to financial institutions and services, right? And so, we have to build healthier communities that also cuts off that pathway and contacts with police. Because as long as we have those systemic inequities in our communities, it doesn't matter really what we do is going to be black, brown, and poor people who are going to be disproportionately exposed to these conditions anyway. So, how are we policing? Let's revisit that. Then revisit like what decisions are we making when it comes to bail? All right, and then beyond making decisions we make to bail, and then also talk about things like PAD. How if it's someone we're dealing with who's unsheltered, right? It's not going to be a police and enforcement issue. It's a social services issue, right? And there's some issues with that because you can't force anyone to want to take on those services, and if they don't, then what choice do we have but to give them a ride to jail, right? If they're breaking the laws, trespassing, vagrancy, what have you, right? And people can talk about even why are we even criminalizing homelessness with certain laws, and that's basically. But all of these things are connected, and so then he's talking about once we get inside, after arrest, if they are arrested and we can't cut that pathway off, you know, are we giving our judges statutorily? Do they have leeway and discretion? Our prosecutors have leeway and discretion to provide individualized justice. We're saying, this person needs there's an underlying mental health condition. Oh, this person here, there's an underlying. Do we have the money in making assessments statutorily where everyone needs to be assessed? Whether that they were incarcerated for a drug offense or not. So we saw laws change in states across the U.S. that said we don't matter if it's violence or property. We're going to treat you for underlying substance abuse and allow you to have access to assessments for mental health issues.
Right.
And so, and that way you can even classify, well, okay, we need to get this number of resources for these persons, or you start drawing data where you can make more intelligence-driven decisions about allocating resources of that nature. And then, finally, what do the facilities look like? So, maybe there should be a task force that's responsible for investigating or reporting on all of our facilities, not just, and I'm just talking about in Georgia, not just in Fulton County, but any other place where, we need to evaluate and kind of make sure that we're treating people correctly. And then also make sure that we are resourcing things. I think that we also need to mandate and think about it. You even have things like our officers who they have in-service training, like police officers. We get a certification after basic training, and every year we have to do a certain number of in-service training hours so we can keep our certification as peace officers. Well, the same thing with correctional officers. They have mandatory in service. We can we, the state commissions, say like they do in policing and other things, well, they have to have a certain amount of hours in mental health care, a certain amount of hours in implicit bias training every year in order to remain employed in the state of Georgia as correctional officers, right? And so, there's different levels of things that in those reforms you can take place, and yeah, so absolutely.
Okay, so given you being in academia and a former law enforcement official, how do you see the role of community engagement and advocacy in bringing about a positive change in the criminal justice system, particularly in response to incidents like those of Rice Street?
No, absolutely. And so, I think, one thing is, community engagement to me also involves, university and working with academics. And so one thing for us is to make sure that, that we have skills with data. We have skills with research and evaluation that we can utilize. Oftentimes, that many local governments may not have, many nonprofits, community groups. I talk to many community groups all the time, and the one thing they don't have access. So we have data, we have these things, but we don't have anyone who can analyze it, tell us how to better allocate our resources, right? So as being an academic, I think it's working with community groups and advocates. The real community engagement is to help lead them to the best research out there, make that available to them, the best information out there. Also help them with analyzing and understanding their impacts on the outcomes they're looking at, and also help them follow a more evidence-based approach in their practices, not just because they're not doing good things already, but really because they have limited resources and they want to make sure how they can best take advantage of the limited resources that they all really have. So I think that's a big role that academics can play. I think another role that as an academic, when it comes to advocates, again, it is to also make sure that they're in the room. We talk about, when we talk about reform, you have to have people from these communities that are impacted. Oftentimes as academics, we study communities of color and urban communities. My wife always says it's like it's a lab, right? So you got to have people with lived experience to make sure that the stuff that we're doing as academics is not a bunch of baloney and BS, right? To make sure it's not disconnected from reality. And even when we're talking about, interventions, for violence and these things in our communities, I think, it's important that we always get permission from these communities and that, we as academics and government leaders don't just assume that we know what's best, right? And I think, that's why community engagement is so important. And academics and also the government can take advantage of nonprofits and other advocates to build those relationships, find those leaders, to bridge those gaps, to vet you of sorts, right? To give you more credibility for these conversations. And I think, that's particularly as an academic, the role that I can serve, or that we can better serve. Yeah, open up our classrooms, open up our campuses for public forums, right? Have public facing lectures, right? That's discussing these issues, right? Giving the communities a voice and things like that. So we have a lot of resources and talent in academia where we can really help bridge a lot of gaps and fit an important part of the reform puzzle.
So, given your expertise in police policy, urban violence, and racially disparate justice outcomes, how do these areas intersect with the issues at Rice Street, and what systemic challenges contribute to the um, perpetration of these problems?
Well, absolutely. We've kind of touched on it before, but think about it. Um, most people who enter our systems are undereducated and come from impoverished communities, underserved communities, right? And oftentimes, even when you think about it, many times of those, particularly in our juvenile system, that we hadn't even touched on, right? In our juvenile system,
Mm-hmm.
those labeled special education who have IEPs and things of that nature, right? We know that they are even at higher risk for victimization and offending, right? In certain environments and conditions. And so we have to address that environmental backcloth, right? Because even if, look, if someone breaks the law, commits a felony, we have to hold them accountable, and nobody argues against that. But we have to also make sure that we have the best trained staff, that we have the best facilities, right, and that we're investing monies into what many communities often think the government sees them as being disposable portions of the population, right? And so we have to make those investments in that backcloth, have to make those investments in those facilities and the people. And so cutting that pathway off, I think, that's the number one thing. I always talk about Eastlake. And I mean, in the system, there's things we can do, right? But I think the most important thing is cutting that pipeline off, because this is the thing. Say we have the best police officers in the world. We got the best and most fair and impartial judges in the world. We got the best prosecutors. We got the best healthcare facilities, mental health facilities in our local jails across in the world. That still doesn't cut off the pipeline of it being disproportionately black, brown, and poor, people who are undereducated, and people who oftentimes have some type of cognitive or emotional underlying substance abuse issue, right? It doesn't cut that off, right? Like with crime, it's not a, you can't arrest your way out of it. And we've seen the impacts of mass incarceration has had on those very same communities. And so we need to really focus on the front end. Like I said, racial disparity and drug imprisonment, it has drastically reduced over the years. The biggest problem we have is disparity in violent offending, right? And that's what's taking up the portion of our prison population. And so we have to really address those underlying issues.
So,
and then once we have, go ahead.
I was going to ask, what do you think perpetuates these problems?
I mean, look, there's a couple of things, right?
Because to get to Z, we got to go to the beginning.
Absolutely.
We got to go to A. So this is Z.
This is a country that has looked at certain populations as less than. Yes. Right? We didn't just get here overnight. We passed Jim Crow laws. It's so many other things, that we can talk about. Hell, Dr. King was just murdered, not even 60 years ago, 70 years ago?
Not even a lifetime ago.
So, like people were still alive when it happened, right? And so, we definitely didn't just get here overnight. And, in a place like Atlanta, Atlanta's one of those places where per capita we have more nightclubs and retail spots than anywhere else in the U.S. But you talk about the black-white disparity in wealth and education, that gap is top 5 in the U.S., right? And so, we have to really make those close investments. And when you hear me saying things like atone for the sins of our past, that's what I'm really talking about, right? I will say that I give Georgia some credit. They worked hard under Nathan Deal, who's a Republican, to reform the justice system. They went under the JRI process, the Justice Reinvestment process. They tried to reduce and narrow the pathway when it comes to drugs, right? But that's statewide, right? Drug offenders and property crime offenders, and establishing more treatment intervention programs in the communities, but also within our facilities. But again, that's our state facilities. And so we have to make those investments also in those facilities, but it's going to be hard. And I always use Eastgate as an example because, Eastgate, the police officers didn't want to in the 80s. They didn't want to go in there. They were afraid to go in that area. And what they did was you have public-private partnerships. And that's why I love, being in the Andrew Young School, because Andrew Young understood that we needed to have sustainable plans so we could build wealth in our communities, right? And so without the opportunity to participate in a capitalistic society, we've always kind of been outsiders looking in. So absolutely, you're right. And so that's why the call is like, nobody wants reparations. I'm not one calling for reparations, and nobody wants handouts. But what we need to is recognize is that there are systemic inequities that place Black people in more contact with the justice system, right? It's not because we're more criminal. It's not because we're more dangerous, right? But, many times when we see crime in our communities, right, one truth that we don't talk about is there's disproportionate violent offending and victimization in the Black community, right? But Guess what? That didn't happen overnight, right? We bear some responsibility. I'm not saying that at all, right? But we didn't get there overnight. we can go back historically. You want to go back to the days of slavery, right? We can go back to there, how our families were torn apart, all the way moved to the Jim Crow laws and mass incarceration, how mass incarceration even changed our family structure, where now the women had to be the head of the households and they had to go be the sole provider. They had to go back to school while our men were incarcerated in these things. They're the ones who had to raise their families and things, right? And overcome and be resilient, right? And so, like, things like redlining that has taken away many resources that we've had opportunities to. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. We didn't just get here, but how can we help atone for those things? Making those investments in the right place. The last thing, my wife did some work with the Second Chance Act, and they're interviewing and talking to people, right, who have been incarcerated for all types of different things. And the one thing they're saying is that, yeah, I did my time and all these things, but I have training, but nobody hired me, and I need some place to live, right? So we need to make sure that we have affordable housing for individuals, because nobody doesn't want a handout. They say we don't want handouts, we want opportunities. And so we need to make sure that we provide equitable opportunities. And we go to places that have been ravaged by things like redlining and gentrification and disinvestment. We go to places, right? It's the very same places that have the highest rates of crime and victimization. And so, so we just have to have the political will to do so. And look, we have the money to do so, right? When we talk about Medicare and Medicaid, we waste over $50 billion a year or so, right? We waste so much money that it makes it the GDP for places in Europe. Same GDP, right? We waste the same amount as their GDP, right? You start talking about local governments across the U.S., $5 to $15 billion a year is wasted across those same areas, right? And then not to mention, and people have said this to me, all the foreign aid packages that we see in the U.S. and we have these very communities here that and so those are some of the things, man. So I'm not saying it's all money, 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 but when you live in a capitalistic society, if you can't operate an opportunity, you'll never be part of that society. And so even when you start talking about people who are incarcerated, what are they returning to? The same places they came from, the same places that had these issues I'm talking about that got them in there in the first place, or increased their likelihood of having police contact. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. All those things have to fall into place, but we have to really start and invest in those communities that are most vulnerable to crime and arrest. Absolutely.
Okay. So this is going to be my last question for you. If you could speak directly to policymakers and those that are involved in shaping criminal justice policies, what advice or recommendations would you offer based on your experience?
On my experience, let's say if there were, I'm going to tell you just some three things. So, the one thing I would say is to start back with the HUD credits to build affordable housing and commercial areas, not gentrified. Because the problem what they've been doing is the rent prices has not been below market price, right? And part of it has been because states have not made it profitable or attractive to our private partners. And so we have to provide tax credits so we can have real affordable housing for our communities. Because with that affordable housing comes access to pharmacies, comes access, concentrated access of social services. So I would say also expand the criteria uh, uh, for those tax credits and the areas in which we can build those credits, right? And make sure. And the biggest issue with Eastlake was this: yes, it got safer, but what we saw was this: it got whiter and more educated over those 2 years. It's a proportion of people that I still don't know where they went to. And so we have to make sure that it's an investment in the people and the places, and we're not pushing those people out, right? We have to increase the opportunity for the individuals there and attract jobs and those things, neighborhood, community by community, right? So that's the one thing I would say for my state leaders. One thing I would say for policing is we need to invest in more intelligence-driven policing. We need to make sure that we are able to hire and attract the police officers that we want on the street, right? And it's going to take investors in paying to get the right people. If we want to have a more diverse police force, more women, more black and brown officers, we're going to have to make it attractive. And so we're going to have to amp up the pay, amp up the investments in technology for our new generations, millennials and Gen Alphas, to attract them toward those jobs and compete with other industries, to get those right and take an intelligence-driven approach. So we're not just stopping and frisking. So when we are making contacts with citizens, that is purpose-driven and it's not just random. And so that's what I would say, particularly when it comes to policing. And then, and remind you, I'm talking about community investment. It also means, getting rid of food deserts. That would help take care of, that would help take care of poor performing schools. In East Lake, it has one of the best charter schools now, and perhaps the hell of the country, right? And so that's going to take care of all those things. And then when you start talking about when you get to courts, making sure you have diversionary programs and rehabilitation programs that have followed science and not things that are used as political instruments. And so make those investments in mental health services, make those investments in substance abuse services, and narrow that pathway to incarceration, back into the community, and perhaps have access to these services. But of course, still holding people accountable. So those are the three areas that I would really touch on. So mind you, I'm talking about paying for better and more qualified, officers on the street. That also means providing them with the best training. That's de-escalation training. That's crisis intervention training, right? All of those types of things. Creating those co-responder models. So even that we're not even taking people down to jail. We're taking people to get some social services and get the help that they really need. That's underpinning their behavior. So those are kind of the three areas, the big buckets that I would stand in front of, and that's what I do almost every day. These are the three areas that we need to focus on to make sure that our grandkids and us are still having these same conversations.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Johnson, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and contributing to this very important and necessary conversation. There's just so much work to do.
No, absolutely. And just thank you for having me, and let me, run my mouth about this. You can tell I'm a little bit passionate about it, but this thing is so complex, right?
It's
There's so
so
many
complex.
different layers to it. So I
Mm-hmm.
just appreciate you just even, taking the time and deeming this important.
Absolutely. All right, so we will catch up with you soon.
All right, sounds good.
All right, thank you.
All right.
One moment. Very necessary, very necessary conversations that that need to be had. All right, let me get my other guest. Hello, my name is Zakaya, and I am calling from the Public Policy Podcast, Stirring the Pot. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. Being someone who has personal experience with the criminal justice system, can you tell me what aspects of the system has had the most significant impact on you, particularly in your relation to your time spent in jail?
What you mean by what aspect?
Um, what aspects of the system has had the most significant impact on you? So whether it's treatment, whether it's the infrastructure, just what different parts of the system has had the most significant impact on you?
I mean, I like to I like being treated like a human.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you felt like your time in facilities you were treated inhumanely.
I mean, most people ain't.
So tell.
Most people not treated like human beings.
Okay.
It ain't set up for them to treat you like human beings.
All right. So how would you describe the living conditions in Rice Street, and what were the specific challenges or issues that stood out to you during your time there?
I mean, Rice Street don't even look like when you get in Rice Street, it don't even look like no jail that's in the United States. It look like a jail that's probably in like a third world country or something. I mean, they got inadequate medical supplies. You know, they shorter staff. I mean, the whole Rice Street really could just catch I mean, they could just catch like a little electrical problem, just burn the whole jail now. Cause it's so many wires out of the walls, and it just, yeah, everything about Rice Street.
So what issues stood out to you the most during your time there?
I mean, how somebody probably. I mean, it's a lot of issues though. It ain't really just no one issue that'll stand out. Like, shit, the staff or you excessive force when it's not necessary. You know what I mean? Anything can happen to a person. I remember it was one dude. He actually got paralyzed by. You know what I mean? He was he was trying to get to safety. You know, and ask them for some help. Ask the staff for some help, and the staff ended up jumping on him, and he ended up being put in a wheelchair. You know what I mean? It's a whole bunch of stuff going on in there.
Okay. So in terms of medical care and mental health support, how would you characterize the services that are available to inmates? Did you face any difficulties in accessing these services?
Definitely, I definitely faced a lot of obstacles of trying to, you know what I mean, just trying to keep up my not deteriorate, you know what I mean, or catch infections. You know what I mean, yeah, I definitely found it was a lot of things that's not being made, available for those in need. You know,
Mhm.
people need medicine, and then they not having the medicine that they need. You know, people need uh people need attention to wounds, and they not doing wound care, and the people not on the wound care list, and they can't, you know what I mean, deal with they wounds getting infected, and people having to go to the hospital because of him not having proper. There's just a whole bunch of inadequacy.
Okay. So the Fulton County Jail is currently under investigation with the Department of Justice. And in the Department of Justice investigation, they mentioned concerns about violence and safety. Did you witness or experience any violence during your time in jail? And what measures do you think
Only
could improve?
violence that I, the only violence I can say that I done dealt with firsthand, I've been at the hands of the police. The police use excessive force on me unnecessarily. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Yeah.
So what measures do you think could improve safety for the inmates?
I mean, like, you can have people who, care about other human beings working there, and maybe, that'll help.
So, upon your release, did you did you face any challenges reintegrating into society? How do you think that the criminal justice system supports or hinders that transition?
You said, did I fake? Can you say that again?
Upon your release, what challenges did you face while reintegrating into society? And how did the criminal justice system support or hinder your transition?
What's up, bro? We ain't got no car today. Come on, you ready? Yeah. Yeah.
We're walking home.
I mean,
We're walking home.
I didn't get adequate treatment,
Because we have a
you know, as far as my wound was concerned. And so put your shoes on the right foot, they ain't on the right foot. So, you know, I was behind on that. You know, I was behind on that. It was, you know, I mean, it was a lot of things.
Okay. So, were there instances of discrimination? You mentioned that there was some unfair treatment in the system, but were there any instances of discrimination?
Discrimination in what way?
Just any type of
Ain't nothing but black. It ain't nothing but black people working at white. Man, I seen like one white person, two white people. Huh?
How we gonna
Okay.
walk?
Discrimination in what kind of way?
I mean, how we gonna walk all the way home?
Just discrimination within the system.
I mean, how we
You know,
walking all
whether
the way
they're
home?
discriminating you against you because of your ethnicity
there's no
or
way.
Now we gonna jump on the bus.
any type of health related or mental health related discrimination.
I mean, yeah.
So how
You
can
really gotta have people who care about you. Like, if you got people who care about you, then they letting them know, like, hey man, this is a mental health. Like my son, my daughter, my husband, come on across the street, bro. You know, they mental health and they need attention. You know, they take their pill, they take this type of medicine. If you don't let them know, then they don't care. A person can just keep saying, man, I take this medicine, it's gonna take them. They don't tell them how long it's gonna take them to get that type of attention that they actually need. You know what I mean? You got to really have somebody who care about you on the outside, cause shit. If you don't got that, then shit out of luck.
so how can the criminal justice system work towards eliminating such disparities? Just in your opinion, how what things do you think need to take place in order to eliminate these disparities?
I don't know what they can do. I always done been dealing with this type of stuff, dealing with the criminal justice. So I don't see them being open to change. I don't see them being open to change, nothing like that. They been jumping on people just locked up. We ain't walking home. We ain't walking home. We just leaving from up there.
Okay, so you feel like that they're not open. So one way to eliminate some of these disparities would be to be more open and transparent.
I mean, the only thing they gonna do is just keep lying about stuff. You know, if they can cover things up, or they can say this is not true or that's not true, then you know, or like I don't see it changing. I done been dealing with this for like over a decade. I've been dealing maybe like maybe like 2 decades. I've been dealing with the system. Almost 2 decades.
And you feel like the government and the jails lack transparency?
I feel like they not gonna adhere to what, you know, the needs of people who they deem as criminals. Because they gonna deem you as a criminal, you might ain't been convicted of something. If they deem you as they gonna tell you, oh, you might be locked up you might be doing something wrong, you locked up, but that's not the case for everybody. You know know what I
Right.
mean? This their whole mentality. You guilty until proven innocent. So if you guilty of something, they damn near don't even. They damn near don't even. They damn near don't even like look at you as you deserve. All of the human. All of the rights of a human being. You know what I mean? Hold
Okay.
it. Hold it while I'm holding it.
So, sir, let me ask you, did you have access to rehabilitation programs or any educational opportunities within the jail?
No, I get. You said was I
Did you have access to rehabilitation programs or any educational opportunities within the jail?
no? I ain't have access to none of that.
So, how do you believe that these type of programs will contribute to the inmates' well-being and future prospects? If there were rehabilitation programs and educational opportunities available to inmates.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, if it was like where people can go to school and get trades or things like that, I think that would help.
Okay.
I think that would help.
So, from your experience, what specific changes or reforms do you think are necessary to address the identified problems at Rice Street and in the broader criminal justice system?
What is the what?
I said, from your experience, what specific changes or reforms do you think are necessary to address these identified problems that are going on at Rice Street?
I think the root of I think just the basic is just like just identifying this person as a human being. You know what I mean? Because like them looking at a person like they is less than a human being. That's similar to how they were looking at blacks, as we was like 1/4 of a man, 1/4 of a human being. So it's like, yeah, just deal with people like these people is human beings. Like if it was your son, your daughter, somebody related to your uncle, how would you want them to be treated?
Okay.
Yeah.
So another question that I have is, if you could speak directly to policymakers and those that are involved in shaping criminal justice policies, what advice or recommendations would you offer based on your firsthand experiences?
I think I would start like, come on, bro. Come on. We finna go sit at this bus stop over here. I think I would start by probably moving like the grievance process from being looked at by people that's within the facility. I would have it be looked at by people who is not connected to the facility. So maybe it be changes that happen, because it's like if it's problems that going on in the facility with people that's incarcerated and they need help, and then they contacting the same people who have been giving them help, it's like it's the same thing. But if they contacting other people who can contact the people who have the ability to give help, then it may be some type of change as far as like the police jumping on folks and stuff like that.
Okay. I really appreciate you taking time to speak with me today and share your personal experience and your perspective. My final question would be, since your release from Rice Street, what do you think about those that are still there, that are left behind? What do you think about them being left in these conditions, and what needs to change?
I really feel for people who, especially people that, I met there and I know like, oh, these people really good people. Maybe they just made a mistake, or maybe they, a person may be innocent. I really feel for them because like that whole environment in there is just like it's a anything is delicate. It's so delicate. Everybody trying to protect themselves. Then you got to protect yourself from other people. Then you got to protect yourself from the police that work there. So it's like shit. I really feel for them people because it's a real delicate situation down in like a third world country jail, really. Down there.
Okay. Again, sir, I just want to thank you for your time. And if you have anything else that you want to add, please feel free.
Nah, I don't really got nothing else to say.
Okay. Well, I thank you so much for joining me today. And you take care, sir.
All right.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it, guys. We have stirred the pot. We've had two really great guests who kind of shared both sides of the spectrum. Um, One who was a law enforcement officer and one who has served time in Rice Street. Um, it's really sad to me the conditions that people are facing at this jail, and I encourage the Department of Justice to do a thorough investigation and really hold these people accountable because, like the gentleman who was on last said, these are humans. They're human beings, and they are presumed innocent until they are proven guilty. So, whether you have committed a crime or not, you still deserve to be treated humanely. And I just encourage everyone to please exercise your right to vote. People couldn't vote. We have the opportunity to vote and to get to know these lawmakers and get to know people who are at the Capitol, people that are putting bills on the floor and passing them. We've got to get involved and we've got to try to change this narrative. There are so many different ways to get involved. I know people are busy, I know people work, but find a way to get involved and don't lose your power. If you are not present, the people will go ahead and make the decisions for you. And they don't know you, they don't know your family, they don't know your history, they don't know what you're going through. So, how could they make the appropriate decision for you? Thank you guys for joining me. This is Stirring the Pot, and I will catch you guys later.